this week we are remembering and thinking about how difficult this past year has been. It has been a year unlike any other. Many of us have sustained losses, and at the same time, we have also found ways to be resilient, to continue to come together as a community. I'm looking at this morning's parasha, which commemorates the seventh day of Pesach, the seventh day, as Rabbi Kling Perkins said, where the Israelites were able to go through the Sea of Reeds. The Torah says that they were greatly frightened, that they were overwhelmed by the experience. And Ibn Ezra says that this was because they were still trapped in their slave mentality. And I would argue that this is parallel to our own experience in the past year. Maybe we don't have a slave mentality, but we've certainly had a mentality that has been challenging. And then at the same time, there are all these beautiful midrashim that talk about the faith that people had. Think of Nachshon. Nachshon, the first person to walk into the waters. And as the midrash says, when the waters got up to his nostrils, he kept going, and then the waters parted. And so we find this deep strength and resilience that we as a community have found. And we've continued to celebrate life, to celebrate life cycle moments. We've shared in the Joy Chronicles that have come out 16 different stories. And Alice Gordon is still looking for more. Linda Skolnick, who's been a leader in connecting us over the past year and strengthening and supporting us, has put together a wonderful list of speakers who will share some of their experiences today. And tomorrow, we will hear from some of those who had losses during the beginning of the pandemic. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda to introduce our speakers.
Today we call this program, this sermon, Ruach and Resilience. 3 weeks ago, we individually marked the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic, each of us taking stock of all that's been transformed in our lives, each of us carrying new outlooks on life, and undoubtedly a full list of losses, some more profound and more profoundly felt than others. Of course, we collectively mark the difficult milestone as a nation and as a state here in Massachusetts and in our own spiritual home, our Temple Emunah community. I know I speak for many of us when I express the sadness I feel about not physically sharing our communal space since Shabbat in early March of last year. I also imagine many of you long for sharing communal spaces with others when recognizing your life cycle events, your Jewish life cycle events. I began thinking what these events mean when celebrated differently. What are we saying as Jews when we continue to honor them in the face of a pandemic? What does it say about us as a people who exercised acceptance, openness, and flexibility when a Jewish life cycle event occurred in 2020? I thought about those Emunah members who've experienced sacred life cycle events and considered it must have taken plenty of ruach, spirit, and resilience to celebrate them. This Shabbat, we'll have a special opportunity to hear from members who've had a new baby, one who is a mochelet, and I love that term, two b'nai mitzvot, a new convert, and a mother of a groom. I'd now like to introduce our speakers, each one speaking about their own experiences, holding adaptability, creativity, tradition, and hope, all with a sense of ruach and resilience. Nicole and Lauren Cohen, they have been members of Temple Emunah since 2010. Their children have all gone through the Billy Dalwin preschool, and Nicole was previously the president of the board of directors at Billy Dalwin. Lauren is a professor at Harvard Business School with a joint appointment in the entrepreneurship and finance departments. Nicole teaches at Boston University School of Education in the special education program. Most excitingly, Nicole and Lauren have 6 children. Eva is 12 years old, Asher is 9, Edith is 7, Henry is just about to turn 6, Sam is 3 years old, and Oscar, who was born during the COVID shutdown, is just 9 months old. Life is loud and hilarious.
All right, Linda, thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting us to chat. And so, as you said, and I think as everyone can see, this was not our first rodeo. So I think what we're gonna do is focus a little bit on how this one has been different, right? So how this has been different. And so, look, about 6 months ago, this little dumpling, Oscar, who you just introduced, He was just dropped into our lives. And from that moment, he kind of permeated and expanded to really represent what this pandemic has meant to us. Much like a drop of food coloring would go into a vessel of water and expand to fill the entire vessel. And so, look, like you mentioned, I'm a professor, and in part of my research, I actually study perception and memory formation. And so it turns out the way people think that our brains work is that they're like video cameras that kind of video all these events and situations, but they're not like that. They're actually much more like still cameras. Okay, still cameras just taking pictures of events. So events, situations, entire periods of our life are represented when we recall them in pictures. So think of like your honeymoon in Barbados, right? Or your family trip to Italy, or your bar and bat mitzvah. So we remember them, and they really come to be represented by a single picture or really salient idea or graphic from the event. And so, look, my heart goes out to anyone who had a sorrowful event during this time period, because that's going to come to represent what it means for them. But thank goodness, and luckily for us, what's going to represent it for us is Mr. Pilkey's here, Mr. Oscar, and from where I'm sitting, that looks pretty okay. And so we have about 1 minute left. So I'm going to turn to the experts. Guys, what did I miss? Mr. Henry, how about you go? Tell us what it was like.
Well, I would say it's like okay because Sam's being cray and crying, and he's kind of like a baby sometimes. But Ozzy, he's way better than Sam because he's way cuter than him. That's basic.
All right, you heard the truth. You heard the truth. The boy doesn't lie. All right, well, guys, thank you so much. Guys, can we say a Shabbat Shalom,
Shabbat
everyone?
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, guys.
Yasher Koach. It was so wonderful to celebrate that Brit Milah on Zoom and to celebrate with you as we did. I'm going to turn it back to Linda.
Okay, our next speaker is Esther Hausman. She is a certified nurse midwife of 15 years, currently working at the North Shore Birth Center, Beverly Hospital, taking care of women throughout their reproductive years and performing elective newborn circumcisions for their clients. In 2019, she became a certified mohelet through the Reform movement and now performs traditional ritual circumcision for families who plan to raise their sons as Jews. She is very proud to be following in the footsteps of Sam Pesaroff, Zichronon Livracha, who was the beloved cantor in her father's synagogue growing up and the local Moel.
Let's get you unmuted.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. When I was asked to speak about my experience of working as a mohelet during the pandemic, my mind went back to the various creative ways in which people managed to share this particular joy with their families. First, as you've already heard, I have the privilege of helping women welcome their babies into the world. And because labors and babies wait for no one, I have been fortunate to be able to continue to have contact with women and their partners throughout this difficult time. Modified contact for sure, but for that, I've been truly grateful. My work in healthcare, however, also put me in a more vulnerable place in terms of catching or spreading the disease. And this was a dilemma that parents had in trying to decide how to celebrate with a Brit Milah ceremony. In fact, there were a few couples who decided to postpone ritual circumcision, having it done in the hospital shortly after birth, with plans to celebrate later. But I'm here to tell you of the unique and joyous ways that I managed during the pandemic for those who chose a traditional route. I originally thought, since we're all on Zoom, that I would dress in my PPE, personal protective equipment, while talking to you to give you a visual of how, at times, I protected myself and others at work during the ceremony. But instead, I will just show you the mask that was made for me to be used specifically during my encounters with families having a Brit Milah. Fortunately, I can make my voice pretty loud, so it was not much of an impediment. So here are some snippets of my experiences over the last year. I walk into a home, shoes left at the door, mask on, hands sanitized, and nobody is ready. The 3-year-old is jumping on an indoor trampoline. The father is sitting on the floor looking disheveled, trying to sync music for his Zoom audience. The baby was crying. I had to take over. I picked up the baby. The mom was occupied. suggested the grandmother take the 3-year-old and get him dressed, and release the dad from his music responsibility, suggesting we all sing, behind masks, of course, and that would be just as nice. It worked out fine. Most families held a hybrid ceremony, part Zoom, part in person, just a grandparent or two in addition to the parents. All present had quarantined and been tested. The majority attended via Zoom, and as you can imagine, there were many challenges. Where to point the computer with the camera, people forgetting to unmute when their part came, people forgetting to mute when they should be. And as we all know, singing on Zoom can sound like a cacophony. I would encourage them all to sign on at least 15 minutes before the scheduled time so that they would have a chance to schmooze, which I think was appreciated. The hardest part was watching the tears fall of those who could not be physically present with their loved ones. It was the best we could do given the dangers of gathering together. One family had at least 15 people on their very large screened-in porch, while the essential participants and I were about 20 feet away inside the house. Another family had the ceremony on the small screened-in porch while everyone else was outside. Fortunately, it was a warm summer night. The standard, and most annoying for all, I think, was that we all agreed and wore our masks the whole time. Well, almost all. In one household, the grandmother present was a cantor, so I asked her to lead us in the Shehechianu. When her part came, she stepped forward, pulled down her mask, and began singing. I was horrified. I didn't want to interrupt, so I just slowly backed away from her as she sang. When her next singing part came up, I sidled up next to her and quietly whispered, "Keep your mask on, please." She later apologized and told me that she just hated singing with a mask on. I felt her pain. One of my favorite experiences was with an Amuna family who has just spoken, and I wasn't really sure that they were talking today, whose 5 other children, I think ages 10 to 3, and I may not have that right, all participated in some way. There were no others present. There was no Zoom, but having those children there, everyone in their Shabbat clothes, masks on, feeling their pride when they read their poem or said a blessing, me answering their curious questions, that was pure joy. As I observed how calm and wonderful the parents were with them and the excitement of the kids, it made me smile and once again filled me with gratitude. Gratitude for having chosen to become a Mohelet, enabling me to bring a bit of Jewish joy into the lives of families during the pandemic.
יישר כוח.
Okay, our next speaker is going to be Zach Post. Zach is an 8th grader at the Audison Middle School in Arlington. He attended Temple Amuna's religious school, 7K through 7th grade, and currently participates in Yad on Wednesday evenings and is a madrich for the Kita Dalet on Tuesday afternoons. He enjoys skiing and plays soccer on the SFC soccer club team in Arlington. Zach.
If that Cohen family is still on.
I became a bar mitzvah on August 29th, 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. My parents gave me the choice of postponing or moving ahead with the service. I chose to move forward with this date, knowing that my extended family, including grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends, would not be in the synagogue with me. I had studied my Torah Parsha and Haftarah for a good 6 or 7 months already by the time we were sent home. As we got closer to the date, there were other decisions we had to make. It was summertime and the cases were going down, so the synagogue allowed the bar mitzvah family to be in the sanctuary and have access to the Torah. I was the second one to do this, and while I was nervous about how well I would perform under these circumstances, it was the right decision for me. Even with everyone else on Zoom, being in the synagogue felt as close to an actual bar mitzvah as possible. I was nervous about leading the service without the rabbis in the sanctuary with me. They usually would give cues during the service to keep me on track. Shachari was especially challenging for me to learn and lead without assistance, but I got to read out of the Torah, have my first Aliyah, and chant my Haftarah. The service went well, and I got to see some of my friends at an outdoor movie night that my parents planned for me as a celebratory event. It was the best we could do given the situation. I'm not sorry or disappointed with how things went. I'm still a bar mitzvah, and I'm grateful that even a worldwide pandemic couldn't stop that from happening. All in all, I thought it was a fun experience, And now I have one heck of a story to tell my kids when they're old enough to understand.
Yasher koach.
Now, I don't have an official introduction, but Galit will share a B'nai Mitzvah experience that Galit experienced a little bit after Zach, I believe in the summer. Galit Samansky.
Hi, I'm Galit, and I had mitzvah in May during the pandemic. It was definitely not what I was expecting because I had started all my studying before the pandemic. And I was really nervous because I was going to be in front of so many people all day. What if I messed up in front of them? My service was already going to be different because it was on a Rosh Chodesh. So I was already nervous because it wasn't going to be like everyone else's. I was also stressed about the party. That's supposed to be the fun part. But I had to choose who to invite. What if the people didn't like each other because I had friend groups from multiple places? What if I forgot to invite someone? Then COVID hit and added another layer of uncertainty. I was really stressed. As we started getting closer, we planned to do the service on Zoom. It was honestly quite nice for me because in the service in front of everyone, I got to read out of my book with all the notes in it. And then after my family decided to have a minyan in our backyard, we decided to only tell a few people we were doing this because we didn't want anyone to get jealous or blame us for putting the community at risk. We were not doing that. We set up chairs 10 feet apart and had everyone masked. We also got a Torah that I got to read out of. We got a photographer who took pictures of everything because it was Sunday and we could. We were planning on doing that anyways. This service was one of the coolest experiences of my life. It was so neat doing it outside, feeling the connection with nature, and having a place in the service for the first time, aside from singing Adon Olam when I was little. After the service, the caterer brought single packaged meals and we sat on picnic blankets by family or group. Later that summer, I realized I didn't even really want a big party or service. If my grandparents were there and maybe a few of my friends, it would have been perfect. I'm so grateful for the experience I've gotten in hard times, and I think we can make the best of the situation. I'm so happy I got this experience, and I hope everyone else can do it too and find something that works for them.
Koach.
Our next speaker is Tom Godot. Tom is a retired registered nurse and converted to Judaism in December 2020. He has been with his husband, Alan Bernstein, for 32 years and is married for 5.5 years. They live in Groton and are happy to be new members of Temple Emunah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
My conversion journey began back in January of 2020 when I and Alan began the Jewish Discovery Institute's class, Pathways to Judaism. The class met once a week at Kehillat Israel in Brookline, but after only about 6 or 7 classes, the COVID-19 bore down on us, and we were told we could no longer come to Kehillat Israel and we'd be meeting on Zoom. About the same time that Temple Emunah closed, and we were no longer able to come to the temple until further notice. So by the time we reached the end of the class, we also found out that Mayim Hayim, the mikvah, where we would all have our traditional immersions, which is a required ritual for converts, was also closed for the foreseeable future. So what were we going to do? And messages went back and forth between the rabbis and the students, and a solution of immersing in a natural body of water started to circulate among everybody. And when I really thought about it, even though that was an option for me, I did not want to go for that because I was holding out for what I wanted to be a traditional immersion. And I told Rabbi Lerner that I was willing to wait for the mikveh to reopen whenever that would be. And the summer went by and it was still closed. And I don't think it was until mid-November that Rabbi Lerner told me the mikveh was reopened, but with very strict protocols, COVID protocols in place. So we agreed to set a date, and that date was December 18th on a Friday in 2020. Now, part of the conversion ritual requires that the candidate meet with the Beit Din, which is the rabbinical court of 3 rabbis, to answer questions and talk about what the Jewish journey has been like. As I understand it, this meeting probably would have taken place at the mikveh on the day of conversion, but due to the COVID restrictions, which allowed only 2 people to accompany me, the 3 rabbis arranged to meet with me 2 days before on Zoom. We did that and everything went well. Under normal circumstances, a conversion candidate would be allowed to have a few guests, and even a bagel nosh with celebrating and schmoozing all around. But due to the COVID protocol restricting me to only 2 people, who turned out to be Rabbi Lerner and Alan, that was no longer possible. But the more important problem that remained was, how were the other 2 rabbis going to fulfill the requirement of witnessing the conversion? And it turned out that that was not anything to worry about. Here is how that happened. On the day of conversion, the Beit Din, which was composed of Rabbi Lerner, Rabbi Kling Perkins, and my teacher in the conversion class, Rabbi Victor Reinstein, met us in the parking lot of Temple Re'im in Newton, a corner of which is dedicated to mikveh parking, since the mikveh abuts the temple parking lot. Now, I should mention on the day before, we had a nor'easter that dumped 10 inches of snow on the Boston area. So being the troopers that they are, the rabbis stood out in the snow in cold temperatures while we all socially distanced about 10 feet apart from each other with masks on, while they witnessed me make my promises, such as commitment to a Jewish life, the study of Torah, mitzvot, the Jewish people, Israel, etc. And always ready for extraordinary circumstances, Rabbi Lerner even put out a small wooden table so I could sign my name in the presence of the Beit Din out in the snow. So now it was time to go into the mikveh for immersion. And again, how were Rabbi Kling Perkins and Rabbi Reinstein going to witness the immersion from their location outside, standing in the snow? Again, Rabbi Lerner to the rescue. As I began the immersion, Rabbi Lerner witnessed in person while dialing up the other rabbis on FaceTime, relaying to them everything that was happening. He called out kasher loudly enough so they could know that my immersion was a kosher one. And although I'm not sure about this, he may have held his phone up so they could also hear me recite the prayers as well. And that is how all 3 rabbis fulfilled the requirement of witnessing my conversion. The conversion experience for me was both beautiful and very emotional. I'm so grateful to all involved who helped to pull off my conversion without a hitch. And for me, it was a lived experience of conservative Judaism in action. With a little creativity and imagination, my conversion, although some of the details departed a little from tradition, was still conducted in a manner that honored Jewish tradition, which is something I wanted all along. So the moral of this story is, where there is a will and a few creative conservative rabbis in the picture, there is definitely a way. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Yasher koach.
And our final story from Ruach and Resilience will come from Sharon Kalis about the wedding. Sharon Kalis was born in Brooklyn, raised in Paramus, New Jersey. and lived in Lexington with her husband Joe since 1985. Members of Temple Amunah since the 1990s, both of their sons, Daniel and Jonathan, attended Hebrew school and became bar mitzvah at Temple Amunah. Sharon is in sisterhood, leads Tuesday morning Shachrit services, sings with the Makela, and volunteers with Temple Amunah's Hine Connecting team, providing Vichor Cholim. Sharon?
Shabbat Shalom. At the end, I will show a couple of pictures. I will show a couple of pictures if it shows up. I have to admit, from the planning side of the wedding, I got a pretty easy ride being the mother of the groom. My now daughter-in-law, Alana, and her mother are very efficient. And with Jonathan's input, they had a very good idea of what they wanted the wedding experience to be and to include. Well ahead of COVID, the Blue Hills Country Club in Canton was rented and food decided, rabbi, photographers, and DJ arranged, ceremony musicians secured, flowers and decorations determined, and arrangements and invitations drafted. The wedding gown was already in, the tuxes were on order, even the ketubah and yarmulkes were printed up, and the personalized wedding favors ordered and received. Save the dates had long gone out with the expectation of 160 to 180 of the family's closest family and friends. I focused primarily on arranging for suitable lodgings for the wedding weekend, as well as place to host the rehearsal dinner for approximately 60 to 80 out-of-towners and wedding party members. And then COVID hit, and everything started to shift around in waves. The bridal shower date was postponed a few times. The rehearsal dinner restaurant notified us that they would not be opening back up and returned our deposit. And the wedding location was on again, off again, and finally notified the couple that while they could accommodate 100 for an outdoor ceremony, only 25 could actually eat indoors. Alana and Jonathan really had their hearts set on getting married on September 6th. Initially, they had entertained the thought of getting married and then having a party the following year. But they wanted life to move on. The ketubah was already printed with the date, and the musicians, the rabbi, florists, photographers, and the hotel was still available. About 2 months before the wedding, they figured out that a backyard wedding at Alana's childhood home in Needham would accommodate the allowable 50 or so people, and went to work at sending a love can't wait invitation to many of the wedding guests. I believe that many of the guests were actually relieved by this announcement, as they had been holding off from telling Alana and Jonathan that they didn't feel comfortable coming to the wedding. The couple and Alana's mom feverishly worked with new vendors to secure a tent, chairs, tables, and linens for the backyard, hire a new caterer and menu, rent a portable bathroom and generator, and determine new decorating and cleanup needs for the backyard. While there were several limitations like no dance floor, no noise after 10 in Needham, and a state-imposed limit on the number of guests, these were not insurmountable. Many of the bridesmaids and groomsmen were COVID tested ahead of the wedding, as were family members that came from out of town. Well, the weather on September 6th was magnificent and cooperative for an outdoor wedding under a tent. And except for the mass guests, as well as the rabbi, you would never know that there had ever been a different plan for the wedding. It was magical. The couple was radiant, the parents were glowing, the hora was danced, the guests had a wonderful time, and even the couple's dog, Misha, made an appearance for pictures. No one fell in the pool, and there were no reports of COVID from the wedding. Perhaps the biggest reminder of what could have been are the remaining piles of personalized ice cream scoops and yarmulkes for disinvited guests, as well as the Canton location, which couldn't be changed on the ketubah. It's good to have these things to think about into your old age and to have a good laugh. The couple is now living their dream, and we are grateful to Hashem. And hopefully you can see
Mazel tov.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher koach.